Welcome to the Q&A Cafe. I'm very grateful to the Georgetown Club for having us here today. And I also want to say I'm grateful to District Donut and Greg Mena. And when this show ends, I want you to go next door and feast on donuts that he brought here today. Because I may forget to tell you that, so I'm saying it here at the beginning. But most of all, I'm just very happy to welcome Dan Rather.
Thank you.
Back to the Q&A Cafe. I reminded him just a little while ago, when we basically did the whole interview in the back room, that we last did this in 2007.
Can't believe it was that long
Can you
ago.
Neither one of us can remember back then, right? No. Actually, do you mind if I just start right off with saying your age? Because I think you look amazing. No. You were 83 years old, right? Let's give him a hand.
Thank you.
Now,
Thank you.
That definitely ages me too, because I've known Dan since 1972, and I was already working when we first met.
When you were 9 years old.
Exactly. But we've had a long, wonderful friendship, and I've had the benefit of working together, but also being friends outside the office, which is the best possible in our world. But we did almost give away the interview, but not all of it. And you do look good.
Thank you.
And what are you doing now? You've got a lot. You're a busy, active man, and I figured I'd just better ask you all your different jobs, because you've got several different hats.
Well, I do have several different hats, but all are connected to the fact that, my life has been, as an adult, about reporting, and it still is. And I've been really lucky, mighty lucky, and blessed to be able to make a living doing what I always had a passion for doing. Basically, my basic job is working for Mark Cuban, an entrepreneur out of Texas who owns the Dallas Mavericks. He also owns a television network. It's now called Access, AXS TV.
Which was originally HDNet?
HDNet. Mark Cuban was prescient about the coming of high-definition television. So he formed a network built around high-definition television. But once everybody got high-definition television, he repurposed his cable network, if you will. But at any rate, I work for Mark Cuban. I do a 1-hour weekly news program for him, in which is a combination now of what we call, quote, the big interview. We can debate how big the interview is, but that's the name of the program, in which I interview people basically in the music and movie industry, in-depth interviews. Unfortunately, we don't touch on much foreign policy or investigative reporting, but I do.
Do you care?
I do hours for him on which we specialize in deep digging investigative reporting and international reporting and some politics. That's basically what I do. I also like to write. Of course, I'm on Facebook and Twitter. And I'm always working on a book and working on a new book. And I had a book the year before last called.
It was your memoir. It was looking back at CBS.
Yeah, it was Rather Outspoken. Was the title of it.
And you were outspoken.
Well, thank you. And I blog from time to time on Daily Beast and Huffington Post, and
you're the ultimate social
that's how my
media dude.
professional life goes.
Yeah, well, so you're busy and traveling all the time, because I assume if you're interviewing people in the entertainment industry, you're going to them as much as they're coming to you.
We do 1-hour produced interviews for people, and this is at Mark Cuban's request, because he's repurposed part of the network to be a live music venue, and therefore our interviews are in service of that.
So when we last talked in 2007, you had just filed suit against CBS.
True.
A lawsuit that ultimately went away.
Right.
And then you wrote your book. And did the book help? Is writing the book as good for you emotionally as if you'd gone forward with the lawsuit and won?
No. Well, first of all, we lost the lawsuit.
But,
you were very kind to say it went away.
Well,
and I appreciate the euphemism.
But it never even got to court. It didn't even get to court, did it?
Look, it was always odds against with the lawsuit.
Right.
And some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. And that was the case with the lawsuit. I went into the lawsuit reluctantly. We won't talk much about it, but I went very reluctantly, and only because I realized that, too late for me, that CBS corporate was trying to erase me from the history of CBS News, which I didn't think was possible to do. And also because I wanted to find out what happened, what really happened in the wake of our story about George Bush's military service or lack of same. But we lost the lawsuit, but we found out a lot during the lawsuit.
Were you able to use it in your book, what you found out?
But the book was not intended, however it may appear, the book was not intended to be redemption. I didn't particularly want to write about it because it was 8 or 9 years after the fact. It's in my rearview mirror. I did the best I could. I'm very pleased and proud and always been honored to have worked at CBS News for 44 years, 24 years in the anchor chair. And I didn't do it perfectly. I have my faults.
Does that mean you've made a kind of peace, Dan?
Oh, no, I made a peace with it a long time ago.
Really?
The last time I talked to you, I was not at peace.
No, you were not. In fact, you got very upset when you were talking about CBS.
Well, I don't remember getting very upset about it, but I was upset about what had happened.
Yeah.
But I can truthfully say now that I rarely think about it anymore. I'm at peace because I've gone on for this job I'm with Mark Cuban. We've now done almost 300 hours, 300 one-hour programs. Yeah.
But then maybe you have the distance to be able to shed some light on why, and you use the word erased, that CBS News erased you. Well, they did the same thing to Walter Cronkite after you succeeded him. Walter, who we both know very well. And what is it about CBS News that's the way it has to go when the marriage has ended?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd always like to make a difference between CBS as a corporate entity and CBS News. I still have a lot of friends at CBS News.
As we both do, yes.
You know, not all of them can speak up.
Well, there you go.
There you go. But, you know, it's hard to compare the eras, if you will, of the late, great Walter Cronkite at his time, because Bill Paley, who formed CBS, was still at CBS when the change in anchor was made. But I think there's such a different mindset with the corporation. That CBS is now owned by Viacom, which is a huge international conglomerate, and they have a lot of interest. News is an almost infinitesimal part of what Viacom does. They don't give lip service to that, but that is a fact. And I think that had to do a lot to do with the effort to erase my time at CBS News. I want to make it clear when I say erase. For example, we broke the story of Abu Ghraib.
Yes, I was going to get to that.
We broke the story. Well, but you can't find that report anywhere. That you get up on the internet and try to find our report on Abu Ghraib.
Right, I tried.
Yeah, it's disappeared.
You can't find
It's disappeared.
it. Yeah.
Same thing with the Bush story. Whatever you think of the Bush story, you like it, don't know what to think. If someone
How are they able to do that?
Well, because they own the property. That when we did the Abu Ghraib story, it was done by CBS News, a division of Viacom Corporation. So
and what year was that? And how far in advance was it of when the rest of us found out about Abu Ghraib?
Well, we broke the story in 2004. I believe it was February, early 2004.
And then what happened with CBS?
Well, they played it one time and one time only. We wanted to follow up on it because we knew that the CIA and others were doing a lot of other interrogation work. But it was move on then. They never knew what to do with the story, and they tried not to run it, but competitors began to breathe down our necks, so they had to run it. Longer story, read the book, touch about it.
Well, let me ask you this then, because it is very timely. How did you feel when the Senate CIA torture report came out this week?
Well, I was appalled, I think, everybody else, and having said that in 2004, in the process of breaking the Abu Ghraib story, when I say break it, we didn't just break it on television, we broke it
everywhere.
Everywhere. News, radio, television, we broke it. That we knew what had happened at Abu Ghraib. We had rock solid, and we had the pictures, which is one reason it couldn't be denied. But we also knew that this was happening other places. But because we were not able to follow up on our original Abu Ghraib report, having been told, listen, get off of, do something else.
Yeah.
That the corporate side of the network seemed to be embarrassed about the fact that we had broken a major story. But for example, at Bob,
was it explained to you that way?
pretty much.
Or in the subtleties and the
Well, it
nuances.
was much more subtle than that.
Yeah.
It was just, listen, this is a controversial story, and we're looking after your reputation, so we just
course.
assumed, yeah. And I said, well, let me look after my reputation, because I'm a reporter, I'd like to break another story.
Yeah.
But with this most recent report, I can't say, because it wouldn't be true, that I had any idea that what has now been called by the president himself as torture was as pervasive as it turned out to be. What we did know, and what we had, only a piece of the story of Abu Ghraib, is that contractors were being used to do some of the worst things that were done at Abu Ghraib. And so by extrapolation, we said that probably contractors are being used in places like Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
one of the places we wanted to go to. But it seems, Abu Ghraib now seems long ago and far away, but it was, if you will, the canary in the coal mine.
Did you ever think you'd see a day when a director of the CIA would have a news conference?
No. In fact, even today, some things surprise me to this day a lot. And just to read in the paper, it kind of jumps off the page that they hold a news conference at the CIA.
At the CIA.
I can remember
Y'all
the time
come.
when we had to negotiate, I don't know, for months, even not a year. We did a piece on the CIA in 1976 for 60 Minutes. But it took about a year's negotiation just to even get on the premises. They weren't holding any news conferences, it was just get in the major hallway. No, I never thought I'd live to see the day. But I also never thought I'd live to see the day when what was exposed in the Senate report was exposed as truth. I just never, frankly, having known some of what was going on, I think with the rest of the country, I was truly shocked at how pervasive it had been, and how many people were contracted to do the work, and how much money they made. There's still a story there. It's an axiom in journalism. If you want to know what goes on, follow the dollar. And there's a lot of reporting to be done on who got these contracts to do the torture, and why these particular people got those contracts, and who made the money, who set the contracts. I doubt that it'll ever be exposed, but there's a hell of a story there somewhere.
Every time these things happen, I'm always struck with the thought of what's happening right now that we're going to find out about in 3 years, right?
Right.
You just got to keep digging. There's another story that's in the news that kind of intersects with your life too, in that you grew up in the segregated South in Texas. You covered the civil rights movement. And here we are all these years later, with what's happening in Ferguson, what's happening with Eric Garner, and if you go back a little bit with Trayvon Martin. And I was very interested in how you view these events in light of your experience, both growing up but also covering the civil rights movement.
Well, my first big assignment for CBS News was to cover what was then the early civil rights movement and Dr. Martin Luther King. That changed me as a person, as a man, as well as changed me as a pro, because I had grown up in a segregated Texas with institutionalized racism, but had no idea of how virulent it could be. But in answer to your question,
so what do you make of now?
Well,
what is this
I make
about?
of now somewhat as I made of it then. And it's never left me. I'm convinced, I was in the early 60s and have been ever since, that when the history of our beloved United States of America is written, I hope it'll be thousands of years from now, but the last line on our country in this great historical experiment, the last line is going to deal with how we handle race. No country in the world, no people in the world ever tried to do what we have tried to do in this country, and that is have a constitutional republic based on the principles of freedom and democracy that's made up of a population with a tremendous mix of race, ethnic differences, religious differences. This is a noble experiment, but the verdict is still out.
Yeah, so how would you measure where we are now versus then?
Look, there's no comparison. We've made some tremendous headway, and yes, to point to the most obvious example, we have a president of the United States of color. I'm not a historian, I'm a workaday reporter, but as best I can figure out, there has never been no nation on earth, no large population tribe on earth has ever had as its leader for very long, and no freely elected time, of minority race. We're the first and only people ever to do it. Now, using that as an example and others, we've certainly come a long way since the early 1960s. And most importantly, there was institutionalized racism in many of our states, including Texas. The institutionalized racism has been reduced tremendously. But we're now in the second decade of the 21st century, and we still have not, we're still working, we're trying,
trying to figure it out.
That phrase, how do we get along? Can we get along?
Yeah.
Is a big thing. In my personal opinion, it is my personal opinion, we either need a dramatically revitalized civil rights movement, or we need a new civil rights movement dealing with race. One can argue that we've gone through a civil rights movement dealing with sexual orientation, but there's this tendency in the country to believe, well, we've solved the race problem. Look, we have a president who's African American. We have.
Yeah, but Dan, let me ask you: to what extent do you think President Obama, the treatment, is filtered through a veil of racism that still exists? That
you mean opinions of him?
Yes, and that. And
I don't think there's any question
that
race is a factor. I would argue a major factor
Yeah.
in the current assessments that you read in many places with race. I know the argument says, oh, come on, Dan, listen, he was elected president and race no longer has anything to do with it. I don't think that's true at all. I do think that opinions of President Obama, not in every case and not by everybody, but to a much larger extent than any of us are prepared to admit, they are put through the veil, the prism, if you will, of his race. I think he realizes that probably better than the rest of us. His place in history is secure as the first person of African American heritage to be president. What he was hoping to do is make it a great presidency beyond that. History books will note that he's the first person of color to be president. I think as things turned out, it'll be very mixed on whether he ran an effective presidency or not.
Yeah, I've always been struck by the degree to which the people who oppose him, that it's just never let up the drumbeat about where he was born, whether he's a follower of the Islamic faith. There's just this unrelenting negativity that I want to say, if we could present his accomplishments, in a colorblind way, what would these same people say? Because basically he's done much of what he set out to do. And it's just...
Well, there's truth in that, but having acknowledged that, I think it's also important to note that there are people who are critical of President Obama, and very critical of him, who do not put it through what we call the...
Yeah, but I'm only talking about...
We don't want to overgeneralize.
Right.
But the basic thing has the opinion of him overall in the main been affected by what you call this drumbeat, which sometimes overtly and sometimes covertly deals with race? The answer is yes, and I think any reasonably decent person seeking to objectively analyze a situation would say the same. I want to be, again, to italicize, that doesn't mean he hasn't made mistakes.
Right.
I could list
Presidents aren't
at least
perfect.
5 that I think he's made myself. If I may, Carol, I want to go back before we leave the CIA thing, because I promised myself that I'd say this to you, because you know Washington. Is it possible, right now there's great heat about this story, and there should be. Every day's a headline, every night it'll be used. But when we get a little bit of distance between ourselves and the Senate report, is it possible that we could have a reasonable, rational debate about whether the CIA should exist at all? And before you jump to conclusion, we need intelligence. We need an intelligence agency, in my opinion. We need a civilian intelligence agency. But there's a debate to be had, and to suggest there's a debate to be had is not to say which side of that debate I'd be on. But the CIA is a very large bureaucracy. It's become a huge bureaucracy. It has been for a long time. And time after time, we go through a period and we say, you know what? They've been out of control. They were out of control at the time of the torture.
Do you think they're out of control now?
I think an argument can be made that out of control might be too strong, but there's not enough of a built-in system of checks and balances on the CIA. That if the CIA, since the CIA we now know, did these things in our name, which they're inconsistent with our values, they're inconsistent with the policies of the presidents at the time. I don't want to be among those that jump all over the CIA now.
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's not in me. I know too many people, good people who work at the agency. My question to you was a question. Do you think we're capable of having this debate? We may decide, listen, no, the CIA can reform itself. Maybe they need to remain. But can we have that debate?
Are you suggesting it's an examination for the Hill to host?
Is the Hill capable of hosting anything these days?
Yes,
that's a fair question.
That's a very good question. But what would be the next iteration of the CIA? Because you already said we have to have an intelligence capacity.
Absolutely. Well, the next would be something, first of all, to do with what we have and say, look, it's like some other huge bureaucracy. It's
so break up the CIA?
So let's just tear down what we have and start from scratch with a new civilian agency of the CIA.
I'm afraid in this day and age what they'd end up doing is just, I mean, look what happened with Homeland Security. You talk about a giant bloated agency.
Well, talk about a giant bloated agency, and has it been effective?
Right.
Again, the history of it. But look, I want to be careful. I'm not an expert on intelligence. I'm not an expert on fighting terrorism. But we do know that when bureaucracies get beyond a certain size, there's a tendency for them to become first ineffective and then counter-effective, if you will. And one of the lessons of the old Soviet Union, who wants to talk about the old Soviet Union, having been there many, many times, communism never scared me. It was the bureaucracy of the Soviet Union that scared me. And I said to myself, we have our own bureaucracy.
Think how many times you've had to fight when you look at all your greatest stories, to some extent, you are fighting the bureaucracy.
Yes. So we just raised the question, and a companion question would be with the FBI. Can we have a debate? Is the FBI too large, too bureaucratic to effectively do what if we don't have this FBI, then we have to start over and start a new one. But is it time to start thinking about doing that?
This would be what a wonderful subject for your show. Getting rid of the FBI, getting rid of the CIA, and starting over again. You were mentioning Obama. Have you met him? Have you interviewed him?
I have.
And so your presidents go back, sadly, to Kennedy. I mean, because that was the first president you covered, and even then you really didn't cover him as a White House.
I actually interviewed President Eisenhower once.
So so how old were you when you did that? You were working for the high school newspaper?
I was, 26?
Oh, okay. Well, all right. So you in one way or another, you've intersected with all the presidents of the recent past, and some more dramatically than others. Right. When you get dramatic with the president, Dan, you get very dramatic. But let's just take two of them that really rose to the surface with you, and Nixon and Bush. With either of them, have you reassessed your relationships with them, what happened with them, what you thought of them, what you think of their presidencies? Do you think history will see either one of them differently than we thought we were seeing them at the time?
What a good question. I do ask myself that question from time to time and reassess. Up to and including now, I think history's verdict on Richard Nixon will be pretty much what it is now, which is to say a tragedy. Someone who came to the presidency with tremendous possibilities and tremendous potential. But in the end, it was about a widespread criminal conspiracy led in part by the President of the United States. Exclamation point, is still hard for me to believe. And I think that whatever the things that President Nixon gets credit for, which he deserves, opening to China, Environmental Protection Agency, it'll always be in the first graph that he was the first and perhaps only president to leave office as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the grand jury called him in a widespread criminal conspiracy. With President, I think he was George H.W. Bush. I'm not sure. I think the way I see that Bush presidency now, it was really the third Reagan term, is the way you think of it.
Mm-hmm.
That President Reagan could have been elected to a third term if it had been,
Right.
whether you like him or dislike him, that was the way he shook out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think history will see, as many of us now see, the George H.W. Bush
You can call
presidency
him 41.
or be seen as a continuation of what President Reagan started, and therefore a kind of third Reagan term. And I think he will be seen as in that broad middle of American presidents, perhaps lower middle part, not a Jefferson or a Washington, not
He
the
has
first
more
or fifth.
affection, perhaps, than historic significance, maybe. I mean,
Yeah,
except
I
for
wouldn't be
except for
surprised.
the first Gulf War was a remarkable.
It was remarkable, but,
But.
and this is frequently the way with presidents, as it turned out, he ended the war. He could have gone on to Baghdad,
Yeah, no, it was
and,
a,
and I'm not so sure history will see that as his decision of not going into Baghdad at the time.
Yeah, his current history even is.
Current history
It's-
says that
it's
was a
pretty
good thing
harsh
for him to
about-
do.
But
Now, beginning to get harsher, and I think history. But I want to make clear, since his was a one-term presidency, how we view his presidency today may very well be what history says about him.
was what went on with you and the Bushes ever about Texas?
Nothing went on with us about Texas.
No, but I mean, was there a part of you that was like, they're not really Texas?
No, I never felt that. Many Texans did feel it
Yeah,
when
that's
they
why
were
I
coming up
asked.
until they got successful.
Yeah.
No, I never felt that. I never had any trouble. Widely believed it may not be, but true
Yeah.
it is. I never had any great difficulty with the Bushes, and if anything, was rather inclined to like, particularly the elder Bush.
Yeah,
Remember, I was a child during World War II.
yeah.
He was a bona fide, certified war hero, and I felt well about him. It's a little akin to people saying, well, how'd you feel about Lyndon Johnson? He was a Texan, a bigger-than-life Texan. Surely you got along with him. You know, I'm a reporter, and reporters are supposed to ask tough questions. And when you ask tough questions, not everybody loves you. And so...
But looking back is so interesting.
Well, what it was with the Bushes, I always got along very well with the father, the first President Bush, when he was coming up. It was only after I started asking really tough questions and tough follow-up questions about what he had said was his role in Iran-Contra, which let's keep in mind what Iran-Contra was, that we secretly sent some of the most sophisticated United States weaponry to the Ayatollahs in Iran secretly, partly to get the money to finance a war, a very highly questionable illegal war in Central America. So my trouble with that President Bush, and I think it led to later troubles with the Bushes in general, was when what he was saying didn't match the record. Now, he later had acknowledged that the thrust of our questions were correct, but at the time it was not politically expedient for him to do so. So it started there. That's where the trouble started.
Of all the presidents you've covered, who do you think was the best at doing the job? And best may not be the right word, but who was the most effective? Who do you think history will look back on with the most favor?
Well, I think President Johnson and probably President Reagan. I'm a believer that President Eisenhower will be treated better as history goes along. Pretty good two-term president. But President Johnson had a historic presidency in terms of domestic policy. Yes, there will always be Vietnam, and he'll always be graded down for Vietnam. But you look at what the legislation passed with President Johnson in his time, particularly dealing with race and institutionalized racism. I think President Johnson and President Reagan, again, whether you can like him or not like him, agree with his policies or disagree with his policies, but he changed the course of politics in the country, not just for the 2 terms he was president, but for up to and including the present time. So you say, which two were too effective? Again, I could go with President Clinton, who's not everybody's cup of tea, and again, let me say you can agree or disagree, but you look at his presidency, and particularly his presidency ended on a high note in terms of where the country was at peace and economically very, very sound. He had an effective presidency.
LBJ was interesting too, because really when you look back on it, his was the last presidency before the White House learned to embrace television and really use television. And you go, and I think that to some generations, when you look at LBJ, you're not seeing him as he was, because you're seeing him in these kind of archaic newsreels that don't make. Because Reagan still to this day, the available media on him, he was such a dynamic performer. Right. Even Nixon, though it failed him, the people around him knew how to use television.
Well, that's a very good point. If you contrast President Johnson, who was terrible on television, and he knew was terrible on television.
And you're not allowed to be that anymore.
And he tried everything.
Yeah.
He did everything trying to increase his ability to be effective on television. Yeah. All failure. President Reagan, a very accomplished performer before he got there, so no surprise, but President Reagan, in terms of communicating and being on television, almost could do no wrong every time he contrast the two. But that's a very good point about television. The President Kennedy had said of him, and it's true, Kennedy's was the first television presidency. We had television before then.
Yeah.
But no president really tried to use it effectively.
Right.
President Kennedy did.
And it was almost because he had that charisma.
He did.
They may not even have known what it was at that time, because
well, in television terms, President Kennedy had the ability.
He was good. He was good on the air.
The phrase is to get through the glass. I'm told it's an actor's term, but that is, television set has this glass.
When did you know you had it?
I never learned that I had it because
I
never thought I had it.
Everybody who's on television has to at some point make peace with that light.
Well, that's true, but that's different than having.
Because you almost feel it. It drags you in.
I always felt my strength, if I had one, and there are plenty of people who want to argue that I never had any strength. My strength was as a field reporter. I was not a natural anchor person. So you say, well, if you weren't a natural anchor person, how did you manage to survive 24 years in the anchor chair, which is longer than anybody ever has done it? I think it's a matter of authenticity. If the audience senses that you're authentic, that they're looking at the real person, I think with myself, people said, look, he may not be the best pure anchor come along, but you know what? The guy loves covering news. I think that was the book on me. I never felt got through the glass.
And you know what's interesting? Because it always comes up about when you became anchor, and that there was, if you go back as I have and you look at the reporting and writing about the transition from Cronkite to you, there's always a lot made out of animosity between you and Walter.
Didn't exist at that time.
But I was there. Yeah. I had the benefit of being the kid sitting on the set during the whole drama of whether it would be Roger Mudd or whether it would be Dan Rather, whether it be Roger Mudd, whether it be Dan Rather. But you were always Walter's choice.
That's true.
He saw you.
I don't know about always, but he told me in the end.
We knew it. Those of us on the show knew it. He just thought of you as being his kind of people.
Well, that's the reason I can say with beware of certitude, but I'm sure. Walter told me himself that, and there was no animosity between. There's a lot of mythology about this, and we don't need to spend much time on it because who cares, I guess, in the end. But Walter was, he was anchor. I was a field reporter. He was terrific to me when I was in the field. I like to think gave him what he needed for the broadcast. We got along fine. There was no animosity until Walter had been retired for a while.
Until you got the job.
Well, no, and he said, look, you're my choice, and I think he told the people at CBS News, if you have to choose between the two rather experienced overseas and some other things. But Walter decided after he had retired that he retired too soon.
Yeah.
And
And you think you retired too late?
No.
Don't you? I think you said that you thought you stayed in the anchor chair a little longer than you should have.
I said a case can be made this day too long.
Yeah.
But in my heart of hearts, I never felt, listen, I loved every minute of it. I loved the responsibility of it. And do I miss it? You bet.
I think Walter kicked himself because he didn't see what was around the corner. He didn't see that in another couple of years, the money was just going to go crazy.
Well, we won't spend again much time on this, but I disagree with you because Walter made big money.
Then. Yeah, he made big money.
He made huge money.
But then there was bigger money to be made.
Well, that is true because we see this in baseball, that Mickey Mantle never made more than $100,000 a year. But when he made $100,000 a year,
that was $100,000.
It was a huge amount of money. I do think you're right, though, that it's inevitable that I think after a few years, Walter would say, boy, if I could have stayed another 5 years, I might have, could have, should have, and stayed. But he'd forgotten, and this is not critical of you. You have never heard a critical word from me about Walter Cronkite, nor will you.
Yeah,
yes, it's true, it's critical. But I will say this about Walter, that he wanted to go out on top, and he heard the footsteps of ABC and Moon Knowledge gathering on it. He told me this himself. He wanted to go out on top. He was a ratings winner and a demographics winner, but it was narrowing down. And he got out partly because he wanted to go out on top, like Ted Williams, hit a home run last at bat, walk through the parking lot, be gone. So you can't have it all ways. You can't, on the one hand, say you're going to go out on top because nobody wins the ratings all the time.
And he had no idea what the aftermath was going to be like, and it just, there's the truth. Do you ever watch The Newsroom?
Oh, I love The Newsroom.
Okay, well, the thing is, it's fun. It's great fun, but people who don't work in TV ask me about it, and I say, yes, it's great fun, but, we never talked like that. We were never, we were really just chasing the stories, but, and the other thing, nothing ever captures or can, and maybe the film that's about to be done about you will, the real brutality that goes on just working in network television. I mean, every day you walk in, there are no guarantees. You don't know whether you're going to be up or down. You may have a good contract.
Very hard to convey that in film.
Yes.
You and I would disagree about one thing. I like The Newsroom. I think Sorkin does a
I like it,
set.
but I don't know that I have great fun watching it, but when friends say, oh, that's so exciting, is that what it was like? And I said, well, it never felt quite like, we never talked that much. It was
but your central point, that is very hard to convey the brutality of it.
It's brutal.
Again, I love it. I still love it. But you've got to love it to do it because it's a brutally competitive world.
And I think brutal is the right word. So I'm not trying not to bury the lead here, but I'm sure everybody knows that, and I speak about redemption. Robert Redford is going to make a movie about your contretemps with Bush called Truth. It's from your producer's book. It's being shot, I think, as we speak in Australia with Robert Redford playing you and Kate Blanchett playing Mary, and I think Elizabeth Moss is in it also. Have you sat down with Redford and talked about being Dan Rather?
A little bit, probably less than you might imagine. That I've known Bob Redford since sometime in the late 1960s, early 1970s. Not a close friend of his, but I've interviewed him a number of times and know him some. I was honored and, yes, humbled. I know that's not a word usually associated with anchor people, but
are you going to walk around Texas together?
He'd take the role. And we talked by telephone some, and we talked in Australia when they were shooting the film. I think they're finished shooting.
You went to the set?
I went to the set in Australia.
So they've taken Australia and made it look like...
Well, only in Hollywood would they take a film that needs to be set in New York and Dallas and shoot it in Australia.
Now it's so you while the character wasn't called Dan Rather, in broadcast news Jack Nicholson played you. They called him, I think, Bill Rorish or something like that. And now you've got Redford playing you. I mean, what's that feel like?
Well, I'm not sure if that's the first part of that's true, but
oh, well, just go watch it sometime.
No, look, if you're the anchor and managing editor of CBS Evening News for almost a quarter of a century, somebody's going to try to fictionalize that. But Truth, which is the name of the film, will be out either late next year or early the following year, is based on our reporting Abu Ghraib and the Bush story. The two things are related. And yes, Robert Redford plays your narrator, and Kate Blanchett plays Mary Mapes. By the way, because she took the lead role was the reason it's being shot in Australia. I joked about it before, but it was, I think she said, I'll play this lead role, but you've got to shoot in Australia.
Well, tell us just some of the questions Redford has asked you about how he gets into being you.
Well, I'm pause for a second because I want to be trying to recall. No, well, one, what about jealousy and envy, which is always, look, if you're the center star doing anything, whether you're center star of the CBS Evening News or Hollywood movie, he was smart enough to know there's a lot of jealousy and envy. How did you feel about that? How did that play at the time when the heat got on? And some people that you thought were bound to speak up for you and talk for you either disappeared or betrayed you. Strong word, case. How'd you feel about that? A little bit of that was one thing. The other was how was the decision made about the timing of leaving the Evening News, which was not my choice. It was those sort of things. But I will say that I think he got most of his information, I know he got most of the information from watching videotape. For example, the sign-off, the close of the last broadcast I did on the Evening News, in which I basically said goodbye to the audience, he didn't ask me anything about that, he just studied the videotape. So, I will say, it's interesting to me, actors have a tough job, you know. This was driven home to me, that when I saw Robert Redford in Australia, he was laser beam focused on what he had to do. We didn't spend a lot of time talking there.
Did you watch him playing you?
I did for a bit.
Is that weird? Fun?
Yeah, that's strange.
Do you go, no, wait, no, don't do that?
No, I didn't say anything, but it's a strange experience.
It's exciting, isn't it, though?
Yes.
You're doing great. Life is good.
Life is good. Look, life is good, you bet. I've been mightily blessed and very, very lucky, partly because I've been able to make a living, and yes, a pretty good living, doing what I always passionately wanted to do ever since I was a kid.
Do you have another campaign in you? Do you think you're going to go out and cover these 16
From
race?
your mouth to God's ear, that if I have my health, you bet.
What do you think the chances are that it will be a Bush-Clinton contest?
There's certainly a possibility of that happening, but Carol, you and I have covered politics long enough to know that overnight's a long time, a week is forever, and we're talking about a campaign in 2016. So a lot of things can happen, but could there be a Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush campaign? Sure. I'll be a little surprised if it works out to be that way, only because right now that's what everybody's talking about. And most of the time this early, what reporters such as the two of us decide might be a dream ticket, dream race, it seldom comes down to that.
Which of the two do you think is least likely to run?
Well, mind you, I think they're both running. I don't subscribe to the idea of, is Jeb Bush going to run? He's running. He's been running for some time. And is Hillary going to announce or not announce?
Yeah, it's whether they're going to announce.
She's running. No, I think it's pretty clear that it's more likely that Hillary Clinton will get the nomination on the Democratic side than it is Jeb Bush on the Republican side. But I can write you a scenario where it turns out the other way. I don't think that Hillary Clinton is a cinch for the Democratic nomination. If you have to bet it, that's the way you bet it. And she's certainly an odds-on favorite. That's not the case with Jeb Bush, at least not yet.
Has America forgiven Texas enough for Perry to be,
well, I think America's forgiven Texas, if that's the right phrase, long ago. But Governor Perry, look, he's also running, by the way.
And maybe this time more effectively than last time.
You never say never.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting.
He hurt himself very badly the last campaign. Is it possible he could come out of nowhere? Yes, miracles do happen. But the good book says the race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. but as reporters we say that is the way to bet it.
Well, on that, you know, our only ratherism today is from the good book. But Dan, our time is up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
So great to see you. So great to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.